My brother invited us to stay at his home and promised we wouldn't have to pay rent or utilities. I handle finances for a living, and my husband, Charlie, repairs cars. We reside in the house where I grew up, which holds special significance as it's been in my family for generations and was once the base of my father's business. My brother was meant to take over that business, so he studied economics in college and even attended Oxford University to deepen his knowledge of business management. Afterward, he returned to the US and worked alongside our dad for some time. When our parents decided to retire and relocate, they handed the business to my brother and the house to me. Consequently, my husband and I chose to make it our home. The location is fantastic, conveniently situated near public transport and essential amenities such as shops, hospitals, and schools. It suits our needs perfectly now, and even when our children grow up and leave, we'll still find it comfortable. I feel incredibly grateful that my parents entrusted me with this house. We were thrilled about our future there, but things took a sudden turn for the worse. After we moved in, my mother-in-law started dropping by frequently. She became fixated on my parents' financial situation, asking probing questions about their wealth because of their business background. She would say things like, "Maya, how much money do your parents have? What will you inherit when they're gone?" This made me uneasy, not wanting to offend her. I replied, "I'm not really sure. I haven't given it much thought. They gave us this house, so maybe there won't be much left." I tried to dismiss her inquiries, but she persisted, insisting, "That can't be right. They're getting older. They must have discussed their finances with you." It felt like she was overly interested in their assets, almost as if she expected a share, while I was aware of what I would inherit. I chose not to disclose that information to her or my husband, who was quite close to her, to prevent any further complications. Then something utterly shocking happened. Out of the blue, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family decided to move into our home. It was a holiday morning around 8 a.m. when the doorbell rang. Upon opening it, I was met by movers, leaving me completely stunned. Shortly after, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law's family arrived, announcing, "We're moving in today, so take care of us." Their smug expressions sent chills down my spine. When my husband woke up and I asked him about the situation, he seemed completely unfazed, saying, "What's the issue? There's plenty of room for all of us." He acted as if their moving in was entirely normal. If that wasn't enough, my sister-in-law made an even more outrageous statement. She declared, "We were invited by your brother, Maya. He said we wouldn't have to pay rent or bills, so we're relying on you." My brother-in-law then began barging into rooms without asking, claiming, "This room gets great sunlight, so we'll take it. Charlie, move all the stuff into the hallway." I felt dizzy with disbelief. This is my home, and they were treating it like it belonged to them, opening doors and claiming spaces as if it was all theirs. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family had already been quite disrespectful, especially my sister-in-law, who even rummaged through my bag without permission. If this continues, they'll start encroaching on my personal space. Enough is enough. This is my house. Why are they acting as if they own it? I want them gone. I usually maintain my composure and avoid raising my voice, but witnessing these individuals take over the home my parents gifted me without so much as a request drove me to my breaking point. In a moment of frustration, I lost my temper and yelled at all three of them. Then, something unexpected occurred. "How dare you speak to us that way? You're the one who should be leaving." When those words were uttered, I suddenly felt a sharp sting on my cheek. Did I just get slapped? It took a moment for the shock to register. All I could feel was the throbbing pain on my cheek. At that instant, something snapped within me. I couldn't live with people capable of such actions. But this house is mine. I refused to let them inhabit it like parasites. So, I decided to pack my belongings and leave, planning to inform my family about the incident. I needed to find a place far from this chaos, so I rented a monthly apartment for the time being. I would have to commute to work from there. As soon as I informed my parents about what transpired over the phone, I could sense their outrage, especially from my dad. He's always been incredibly caring and has cherished both me and my brother. As a CEO, he's strict, but as a father, he has always been kind and willing to help us out of any predicament. I didn't want to burden my parents, who were on the verge of retirement, with this mess, but I felt I had no choice since my rightful home was being taken from me. While I stayed in the temporary apartment, I was sure my husband and his family were settling in comfortably at my house. So, I decided to take action based on my brother's and father's advice. A few days later, during my break, I checked my phone and noticed dozens of missed calls and messages from my husband. I knew precisely why he was trying to reach me. I acted swiftly and contacted the water and electricity companies to disconnect the services. Our house relies entirely on electricity, and without it, nothing functions. We haven't installed solar panels yet, so there's no other source of power. Given the scorching heat, living without electricity and water must have been challenging for them. My husband's calls were likely related to this issue. Just as I was about to ignore one of his calls, he rang again, perfectly timed with my break. "Hey, what's happening? There's no power, and the water isn't working. Did you cut off the utilities?" I could hear the panic in his voice. Since the house belongs to me, it didn't make sense to keep the electricity and water running now that I wasn't living there, right? That's why I had them turned off. If I left the utilities on, I would be stuck paying bills for a place I wasn't occupying. I can't agree to that, so I naturally had them disconnected. When I explained this to my husband, he became furious and insisted I restore the services immediately, but just because he wanted me to, that didn't mean I was going to comply. I understood that if they wanted the utilities back on, they should pay for it themselves. However, whenever this comes up, they always say things like, "It's your house, so you should cover the costs." Their words and actions don't align at all. I have no intention of renewing the contracts or demanding they vacate the premises immediately. I simply hung up after stating my position. As my break ended, later on, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law all called, repeating the same requests. They wanted me to restore the electricity and water because their rooms were too hot and uncomfortable, and they found it inconvenient to be without water, but those were their issues, not mine. After listening to their complaints, I told them to handle it themselves and hung up. I thought they were just being greedy and would eventually give up and leave. Yet, after a week passed with no sign of them departing, I decided to take more decisive action. I consulted a lawyer from my father's firm about the situation and asked him to issue a notice to my husband regarding the trespassing. They had entered my home without permission, forced me out, and were treating it as though it belonged to them. I informed them that I was contemplating legal action against them. Why was I receiving a notice from an attorney? Did it really need to come to this? My husband, clearly taken aback and frantic about my decision, approached me in search of a resolution, fully aware of how much they value their reputation. The mere thought of facing a lawsuit would be incredibly daunting for them. They definitely want to avoid dealing with a lawyer, yet they are reluctant to abandon their current way of life. Thus, they're likely attempting to persuade me to allow them to remain. I can easily see through my husband's motives, but I couldn't bring myself to heed their pleas, so I stood firm against his requests. Eventually, my husband lost his temper, forgetting he was at work, and shouted, "Enough! Just because we're being a little underhanded doesn't give you the right to act all superior. Go back to how things were and forget about the lawyer." Despite his outburst, I remained unfazed. Instead, I felt irritation at his words, thinking, who does he believe he is, trying to take over someone else's home? No matter how loud he yells, my position remains unchanged. If they continue to squat here, I will pursue legal action. They better reconsider their actions. Even as he continued to shout at me over the phone, I ignored him and hung up. It felt pointless. I had already consulted my lawyer about divorce. Upon returning home, I noticed missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but I knew they would only attempt to manipulate me. Not wanting to waste any more time, I blocked their numbers to prevent any further communication. After the legal threat, my prideful in-laws couldn't handle the idea of being sued. They quickly packed their belongings and vacated the house. With my lawyer's assistance, the divorce negotiations went smoothly. I arranged for a cleaning service to come in, and at last, I returned to my spotless home. Living independently from my husband's family in a monthly rental was quite pleasant. Nothing beats being back in my own space. However, I noticed that certain areas of the house needed some repairs. I spoke to my father, who connected me with a trustworthy contractor. I began organizing the renovations with their help. Living alone is incredibly comfortable. I relish the freedom of not being tied down by anyone else. I found joy in my newfound independence. I could relax on the couch without anyone nagging me and eat whatever I wanted without facing judgment. Then, after 3 months of silence, I received a call from an unknown number. At first, I ignored it, assuming it might be from a contractor. However, when the calls kept coming, I reluctantly answered, only to discover it was my ex-husband, from whom I had just divorced with legal assistance. We had promised never to reach out again, so why was he calling now, especially with a new number? We had agreed through our lawyers to remain apart indefinitely. There was nothing left to discuss, so I requested he not contact me again. Just as I was about to hang up, he begged, "Please, just hear me out for a moment. I'm pleading with you." Despite my hesitance, he began speaking without waiting for my permission. It turned out his company was undergoing a serious financial crisis, and they had decided to reduce his pay. Additionally, my mother-in-law's health was declining, leaving her unable to work. My sister-in-law and her husband were unable to contribute significantly to the household costs due to his unstable job situation. Although my sister-in-law was juggling multiple part-time jobs, most of her earnings were going towards settling her husband's debts. My ex-husband was struggling to make ends meet, and with the pay cut, things were only going to get tougher. After listening to all of that, all I could think was, and they invaded my house without my permission, did whatever they wanted, and even attempted to force me out. It's just unbelievable. I feel no compassion for individuals who would act in such a way, and I have zero sympathy for them. Even if you tell me about their hardships, it changes nothing. They're your family. You should manage your own issues. I can't help with that. My ex-husband grew even more frantic at my response. Don't say that. We're in dire straits. We might not even be able to afford rent for our apartment, and we'll struggle to buy food tomorrow. We used to be a family, remember? Please help us, he implored, nearly in tears, but I remained unconvinced. When I was in a tough spot, he did nothing to assist me, and both he and my mother-in-law always looked down on me. Like her, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law constantly belittled me. They insulted my appearance and my traditional views. They didn't care how much it hurt. My mother-in-law made everything worse, pressuring me to conceive as soon as possible. She forced bizarre herbal remedies on me, scheduled unnecessary doctor visits, and spread rumors to the neighbors that I was infertile. Reflecting back, there wasn't a single positive aspect to my marriage. My ex-husband, who had been kind before we wed, became a pawn under my mother-in-law's influence once we were married. On the very first day, she barged into our home while I was out for an appointment. She cried to my husband, claiming she wanted to befriend me, but the moment we met, she would insult me. She'd say things like, "My son seems to have lost weight. Is it due to your terrible cooking?" Whether we were at home or out, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law would join in, laughing at my expense. I can't handle people like that anymore. No matter what you say, my feelings won't change. I can't assist you, so I'm going to hang up now, and please don't contact me again. With that, I finally ended the call and blocked the new number. Knowing my ex-husband, he might change his number again to reach me, so I decided to get a new phone number at the store over the weekend. However, before I could do that, those four broke their promise made through the lawyer and suddenly showed up at my house at 11 p.m. "Let us in. We need your help. We're family. You must assist us." They pounded on the door, shouting loudly without regard for the late hour. "What's going on at this hour? Please go home. You're disturbing the neighbors." When I approached the door, they seemed ready to push their way inside, so I attempted to speak to them through the intercom, but they ignored me. They kept banging on the door, creating a ruckus. I couldn't believe I was dealing with such reckless behavior. I felt overwhelmed and considered calling the police when I heard sirens approaching from outside. It appeared a neighbor had taken action. As soon as they heard the police sirens, the group panicked, thinking I had called the authorities, and tried to escape. However, with a crowd gathering, leaving was impossible. Consequently, they were escorted to the police station by the responding officers. I was questioned about the incident and explained everything that had occurred. News of my ex-husband and his companion's actions spread quickly through the neighborhood. Among the crowd was a colleague of my ex-husband's, and by the next day, the entire office was aware of the situation. Already struggling due to a pay cut, involving the police sealed my ex-husband's fate at work. He was fired, unable to afford his apartment rent anymore. The financial pressure created tension between him and his sister's family, leading to the end of their shared living arrangement. Now, Charlie lives in public housing with his mother, working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Even his mother has taken on part-time work, eager to help financially. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again in the next video. Stay amazed.